Thomas Brennan knelt beside his daughter's bed, his calloused hand resting on her forehead. Agnes burned like forge-heated iron. The fever had taken hold 3 days ago, and now her small body trembled beneath the worn quilt Sarah had stitched before she died. "Papa," Agnes whispered, her voice cracked and thin. "Am I dying?" The words hit him like a fist to the chest. He dipped the cloth in cold water, wrung it out, pressed it gently to her burning skin. "No, sweetheart. You're going to be just fine." But the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Outside, twilight bled into darkness. The autumn wind rattled the cabin windows. Thomas glanced at the empty medicine shelf, the dying fire in the hearth, the gathering storm clouds beyond the glass. He had nothing left to give her. No medicine, no money, no hope. Earlier that afternoon, he'd ridden through the first drops of rain to fetch Doc Harrison from town. The man had opened his door just wide enough to show his disapproval. "Payment up front, Mr. Brennan," Harrison had said, his voice cold as winter stone. "I've extended credit to you twice already, cash in hand, or no visit." Thomas had stood there in the rain, hat in hands, shame burning hotter than any fever. "My daughter's dying." "Then you'd best find the money quickly." The door had closed with finality. Now Thomas sat beside Agnes in the lamplight, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow gasps. The ride home had been long and empty. Rain had soaked through his coat. His horse had known the way while Thomas stared at nothing, his mind circling the same dark truth over and over. He'd failed Sarah 3 years ago, couldn't afford the medicine that might have saved her from this same fever, and now history repeated itself with cruel precision. Agnes stirred, her eyes opening slightly. "Mama used to sing when I was sick." Thomas's throat tightened. He couldn't remember Sarah's songs. The melodies had died with her, buried in the small plot behind the church. "Rest now," he managed. "Save your strength." The fire crackled low. Thomas added the last piece of wood, watched the flames catch and climb. When it burned out, he'd have to go outside in the storm for more. But for now, he needed to stay here, to be present for whatever came. He hadn't prayed since Sarah's funeral. The words had seemed useless then, hollow comfort for those who remained behind. But desperation made believers of even the most doubtful men. Thomas lowered his head, his rough hands clasped tight. "Please, Lord," he whispered into the darkening room. "Don't take her too. I can't lose them both." Thunder rolled across the prairie, long and low. Rain began to fall in earnest, drumming against the roof like 1,000 urgent fingers. Agnes's breathing grew more labored, and Thomas Brennan, alone in his cabin with his dying daughter, had never felt more helpless in his entire life. The pounding on the door came sudden and urgent, cutting through the sound of rain. Thomas jerked upright from his chair. For a wild moment he thought Doc Harrison had changed his mind. He stumbled to the door and yanked it open. A woman stood on his threshold. She was tall, dressed in a fine traveling cloak that streamed with rain. Her face was pale in the lamplight spilling from the cabin, her dark hair pinned back beneath a soaked bonnet. She carried a leather medical bag in one hand, the kind with brass fixtures that cost more than Thomas made in a year. "I'm Dr. Helena Ashford," she said, her voice clear and certain. "I heard in town that a child needs help." "Where is she?" Thomas blinked, unable to form words. The woman Dr. Ashford didn't wait for his answer. She stepped past him into the cabin, already shrugging off her wet cloak. "How long has she had the fever?" Helena asked, moving toward Agnes's bed. 3 days, Thomas managed. "But I can't pay. Doc Harrison wouldn't come without—" "We'll discuss that later." Helena set her bag on the small table beside Agnes's bed and opened it. "Right now, your daughter needs treatment." She bent over Agnes with practiced efficiency, pressing her fingers to the child's wrist. Her movements were quick and sure. She examined Agnes's throat, felt her forehead, listened to her breathing. Thomas stood frozen by the door. rain dripping from his coat onto the floor. "Bring me hot water," Helena said without looking up. "As hot as you can manage, and I'll need clean linens if you have them." The commands broke through his shock. Thomas moved to the stove, added wood, set the kettle on to boil. He found the cleanest cloth he had, more of Sarah's old linens, kept carefully in the chest. Helena had removed her bonnet and rolled up her sleeves. Her hands moved through her medical bag with certainty, pulling out small bottles and packets. Thomas glimpsed labels he couldn't read, medicines he'd never heard of. "Is it the same fever that took her mother?" Helena asked quietly. Thomas nearly dropped the kettle. "How did you mentioned it to Doc Harrison. He was complaining about you in the saloon." Helena's expression remained neutral. "Said you were a deadbeat farmer trying to guilt him into charity work." The shame returned, hot and familiar. Thomas set the hot water beside her without meeting her eyes. "Harrison's an ass," Helena said matter-of-factly. She dampened a clean cloth and began wiping Agnes's face. "But he's also the only doctor in 50 miles, which is why I'm here." "I don't understand." Thomas said, "Why would you help us?" Helena paused, her hand resting gently on Agnes's forehead. Something flickered across her face, pain. Maybe. Or memory. But it passed quickly. "Because I can," she said simply. "And because no child should suffer for lack of money." She poured something into a spoon-dark liquid that smelled of herbs and alcohol. "Help me sit her up. She needs to take this." Together they raised Agnes enough for Helena to get the medicine past her lips. The child coughed but swallowed. Helena laid her back down gently, adjusting the quilt with careful hands. Thunder cracked overhead. The storm was settling in for the night. Helena pulled the chair closer to Agnes's bedside and sat down. She opened another bottle from her bag, began preparing a second dose. The lamplight caught on the gold clasp of her medical bag, on the quality of her dress beneath the travel-stained exterior. "You should rest," she said to Thomas. "This is going to be a long night," but Thomas shook his head. "She's my daughter." Helena looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes were gray, tired, and held something he recognized. Grief. Maybe. Or the weight of carrying too much alone. "Then we'll keep vigil together," she said. She rolled up her sleeves further and settled in. Outside, the rain drummed steadily on. Inside, two strangers prepared to fight for a child's life. The hours stretched long and quiet. Helena worked with steady precision, checking Agnes's pulse, administering medicine in careful doses, replacing warm compresses with cool ones. Thomas followed her instructions, boiling more water, bringing fresh cloths, building up the fire. He felt useless despite the tasks, helpless. But at least he could do something, even if it was just carrying water while this stranger saved his daughter's life. Near midnight, Agnes drifted into fevered sleep. Her breathing remained shallow but steady. Helena sat back in her chair, her shoulders dropping slightly for the first time since she'd arrived. "She's strong," Helena said softly. "That will help." Thomas stood by the fire, unable to sit. "She's all I have left." The words came out before he could stop them. Helena glanced at him, waiting. "My wife Sarah died 3 years ago." Thomas continued. His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. "Same fever Agnes has now. I couldn't afford the medicine then either. Doc Harrison said he'd extend credit, but then he wanted payment before Sarah was even cold in the ground." He stared into the flames. "I sold everything. The good plow, the breeding cow, Sarah's mother's silver, paid Harrison his blood money. But it was too late anyway. She was already gone." Helena's face remained still, but something shifted in her eyes. "I've been alone with Agnes ever since," Thomas said. "Working the farm, trying to keep us fed. Some days I wonder if I'm doing right by her. If she'd be better off with a family that could actually provide Don't, Helena said sharply. Thomas looked at her, startled. Don't question whether you're enough, she said, her voice softer now but fierce. A child doesn't need wealth. She needs love. And it's clear Agnes knows she's loved. The certainty in her words made Thomas's chest tighten. He wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that love could substitute for all the things he couldn't give his daughter. You speak like you know something about it, he said carefully. Helena's hand went to the worn gold ring on her finger. She twisted it once, twice. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old pain. I was married to a doctor in Boston, she said. Charles Ashford, brilliant man, successful practice. He believed women had no place in medicine. A bitter smile touched her lips. So I learned anyway, in secret, from his books, his journals. I watched him work when he'd allow it. He sounds like a hard man, Thomas said. He was a product of his world. Helena's gaze drifted to the darkness beyond the window. When he died 2 years ago, I kept traveling, couldn't stay in that house anymore. Couldn't stay anywhere. Really? Agnes stirred, murmuring something in her fever. Helena rose immediately, checked her pulse, adjusted the compress. The movement was automatic, almost maternal. Why come here? Thomas asked. To the frontier. Because here, no one cares that I'm a woman with medical training. Helena said, They just care whether I can help. She sat down again, her eyes on Agnes. Or they should. Anyway. The fire popped and settled. Rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof. She looks peaceful, Thomas said, watching his daughter sleep. The medicine's working, Helena replied. But we're not through it yet. The next few hours are critical. Thomas nodded. He pulled a second chair closer to the bed, sat down heavily. The exhaustion of 3 sleepless nights was catching up with him. You won't lose her, Helena said quietly. Not tonight. She said it with such certainty that Thomas almost believed her, almost let himself hope. You're a good man, Thomas Brennan, Helena added. Don't let anyone tell you different. Outside. The storm settled into a steady rain. Inside the cabin. Lamplight held back the darkness. 2 wounded people kept watch over a sick child. And for the first time in days, Thomas felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Time moved differently in the deep hours of night. Thomas lost track of how long they'd sat there. 2 hours, 3, maybe more. Helena checked Agnes every few minutes, her fingers on the child's wrist, her expression focused and calm. The storm outside had found its rhythm, no longer raging but persistent. Rain whispered against the windows. Wind moved through the eaves like a living thing. Thomas watched Helena work. She moved with quiet competence, measuring medicine into a spoon, tilting Agnes's head to help her swallow even in sleep. Everything she did seemed effortless, natural. He noticed details he'd missed before. The quality of her dark dress beneath the travel-worn exterior. The way she held herself, straight-backed even in exhaustion. The worn wedding ring that she touched occasionally. An unconscious gesture. Where were you headed? Thomas asked. Before you heard about Agnes. Helena glanced up from measuring out another dose. Nowhere in particular. I've been traveling for months now. Small towns, frontier settlements, helping where I can. That's a lonely way to live. Yes, she said simply. It is. She administered the medicine, then sat back. For a moment they listened to Agnes's breathing, steady but still too fast. Tell me about her, Helena said. When she's well, what's she like? The question caught Thomas off guard. He found himself smiling despite everything. She asks questions about everything, he said. Why do chickens scratch the dirt? Why does the wind blow? Where does the sun go at night? He shook his head. Sometimes I think she'll talk my ear clean off. Helena's expression softened. She's curious. That's good. She loves wildflowers, Thomas continued. Brings them home by the handful every spring. Makes me put them in jars all over the cabin. Says they make the house happy. They do, Helena said quietly. Thomas looked at her, in the lamplight. She seemed younger somehow. Less guarded. She looks like her mother, he said. Same eyes, same smile. Sometimes it hurts to look at her, but most times, it's the only thing that keeps me going. Helena's hand moved to her ring again. She twisted it slowly. You lost someone too. Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Helena was quiet for a long moment. Outside. The rain continued its whisper. Finally, she spoke. I had a daughter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma. She would have been 8 this year. Thomas's chest tightened. Would have been. She died when she was 5. Helena stared at Agnes, but Thomas knew she was seeing someone else. From fever. Like this. The words hung in the air between them. Helena, Don't, she said softly. I didn't tell you for sympathy. I told you so you'd understand why I'm here. Why I had to come. Thomas watched her face, saw the old pain living there like a permanent guest. When I heard in town that a father was begging for help for his daughter, Helena continued. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let another child. She trailed off, shaking her head. Agnes stirred, her small hand reaching out. Helena took it gently, held it between both of hers. Your daughter is lucky, Helena said, looking at Thomas now. She has a father who loves her enough to beg, who loves her more than his pride. Her voice caught slightly. That's everything. Thomas didn't know what to say. The weight of her loss pressed against his own. 2 griefs recognizing each other across the space of the small cabin. I'm sorry, he managed. For Emma. For all of it. Helena nodded once. So am I. She turned back to Agnes, checked her forehead, her pulse. Professional again, contained. But Thomas had seen beneath the surface now, had glimpsed the wound that drove this woman from town to town, treating strangers' children because she couldn't save her own. The storm outside grew quieter. Inside, the lamp burned steady. 2 strangers sat together and shared vigil, carrying their dead between them like stones in their pockets. Near midnight, everything changed. Agnes jerked in her sleep, her body going rigid. Her breathing turned harsh and quick. Thomas started to rise, but Helena was already moving, her hands on Agnes's face, her expression sharp with focus. Her fever spiking. Helena said. Her voice stayed calm, but Thomas heard the edge beneath it. I need cold water. Now. Thomas grabbed the basin and stumbled outside into the rain. His hand shook as he filled it from the water barrel. The cold shocked his skin. He ran back inside, water sloshing. Helena had opened her medical bag again, was pulling out bottles with quick, precise movements. She dampened cloths in the cold water, pressed them to Agnes's forehead, her neck, her wrists. Come on, Helena whispered. Come on, sweetheart, stay with us. Thomas stood frozen, watching his daughter's body fight itself. Agnes's lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. What's she saying? He asked. Helena leaned closer. She's asking for her mama. The words gutted him. Thomas moved to the bedside, took Agnes's hand. I'm here, sweetheart, Papa's here. But Agnes didn't respond. Her eyes were open but unseeing, lost in fever dreams. Helena worked with focused intensity, changing compresses, checking pulse, administering medicine. Her hands moved fast but steady. Nothing wasted, nothing uncertain. But Thomas saw something else. a tremor in her fingers, a tightness around her mouth. "Not again," Helena whispered. "Please, not again." She said it so softly Thomas almost missed it, but he heard, and he understood. Agnes's breathing grew more labored. Helena pressed a stethoscope to the child's chest where it had come from. Thomas didn't know. She listened, her face grave. Her heart's racing. Helena said, "We need to bring the fever down. Now." She mixed something in a cup liquids from 3 different bottles. Her hands shook slightly. She steadied them with visible effort. "Helena," Thomas said, "hold her up." Helena commanded, "I need to get this down." Together they raised Agnes. Helena got the medicine between the child's lips, massaged her throat to help her swallow. Agnes coughed, choked, but kept it down. They laid her back, waited. The minutes stretched like hours. Agnes's breathing remained harsh. Her skin burned beneath the cold compresses. Helena's hand went to her own chest, pressed there. "Please," she whispered again. "Please don't take her. Don't let me fail again." Thomas realized she wasn't talking to him, wasn't talking to anyone in the room. "You're not failing," he said quietly. Helena's eyes snapped to his, fierce and bright with unshed tears. "You don't know that. You don't know." She stopped herself, shook her head. "Tell me." Thomas said, "Tell me about Emma." For a moment he thought she wouldn't. She turned back to Agnes, checked her pulse again. But then, in a voice rough with old pain, Helena spoke. "She had fever for 2 days. She said, 'Charles was traveling. I thought I could manage. I'd learned so much from watching him, from studying. I thought I knew enough.'" She laughed bitterly. "I was so proud, so certain." Agnes's breathing shifted slightly. Both adults froze, listening. "By the time I admitted I needed help," Helena continued, "it was too late. I sent for another doctor, but Emma was already slipping away." Her voice cracked. "She died in my arms, and the last thing she said was, 'Mama.' Why didn't you help me?" The confession broke something open in the room. Thomas felt it like a physical thing, the weight of her guilt and grief. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "It was exactly my fault," Helena replied. "I was too proud to admit I didn't know everything. Too stubborn to ask for help, and my daughter paid the price." She looked at Thomas then, her gray eyes swimming. "I can't let that happen again. I can't. I have to save her. I have to save Agnes." "We," Thomas said firmly. "We have to save her. Together." Helena's breath caught. For a moment she just stared at him. Then she nodded once, sharp and certain. "Together," she repeated. They turned back to Agnes. The child's breathing had eased slightly, just barely, but enough to notice. Her body relaxed incrementally. Helena checked her pulse, waited, checked again. "It's working," she whispered. "The fever's starting to break." Thomas felt tears on his face. He didn't remember starting to cry. Outside. The first gray hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. The rain softened to a gentle patter. And inside the cabin, 2 broken people knelt together beside a sleeping child and dared to hope. Pre-dawn light crept through the windows, thin and colorless. Agnes slept quietly now, her breathing steady. The crisis had passed. For the moment, at least, she was stable. Helena sat back in her chair, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Thomas saw the toll the night had taken, shadows under her eyes, lines of fatigue around her mouth. But mostly he saw the relief. "She's going to be all right," Helena said softly. "Another few hours and the worst will be over." Thomas should have felt nothing but gratitude. Should have been on his knees thanking God and this woman who'd saved his daughter. Instead, shame rose in his throat like bile. He looked around his cabin with new eyes. The worn furniture, the patched curtains, the bare shelves, the poverty that soaked into every corner like stain into wood. Helena had seen all of it, had spent the night in this poor excuse for a home, using medicines that probably cost more than everything Thomas owned. And for what? For a man who couldn't even pay for a doctor's visit? For a child whose father was worthless? You should go, Thomas said abruptly. Helena looked up, startled. What? You've done enough? He stood, his movements jerky and wrong. More than enough. You should get some rest. Go back to town. Thomas, Agnes still needs monitoring. I can watch her, he interrupted. You've shown me what to do. I'll manage from here. Helena rose slowly, her expression confused. I don't understand. What's wrong? Everything was wrong. The weight of obligation pressed on Thomas's chest like a stone. This woman had saved his daughter's life, and he had nothing to give her in return. Not even proper payment. Not even basic hospitality beyond a chair and cold water. I can't repay you, he said, the words tasting like ash. Not now, not ever, probably. So there's no point in you wasting more time here. I never asked for payment. That's not the point, Thomas said, his voice rising. The point is, I'm a failure. A poor dirt farmer who couldn't save his wife and almost lost his daughter. You shouldn't waste your skills on people like us. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. But once started, he couldn't stop. You should be helping people who matter, he continued. People who can actually pay you. Who can appreciate what you've done. Not some worthless stop. Helena's voice cut through his like a blade. She stood very straight, her gray eyes blazing. People like you. What exactly does that mean? Thomas. Poor people, he said bitterly. Desperate people. People with nothing to offer. A father who loves his daughter enough to beg for help? Helena's voice shook with anger. A man who stayed awake all night praying over her, who was willing to sell everything he owned to save her. That's who you think doesn't deserve help. Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. I can't give you anything in return. I don't want anything in return, Helena said. That's what you're not understanding. I came here because a child needed help. Because I could do something about it. That's all. No one does something for nothing. Thomas muttered. Then maybe you don't know the right people. Helena replied sharply. The silence that followed felt heavy and wrong. Outside. The dawn light grew stronger. Inside. Distance opened between them like a wound. Helena turned away first. Fine, she said quietly. If you want me to leave, I'll leave. She began gathering her things, packing her medical bag with sharp, precise movements. Thomas watched her, feeling something crack in his chest. Helena. No, she said without looking at him. You've made yourself clear. You don't want charity. You don't want help from someone who sees you as worth helping. I understand. She closed her bag with a snap, reached for her cloak. Agnes stirred in her sleep, murmuring something neither of them could hear. Thomas looked at his daughter, then at Helena, her back rigid with hurt and anger. He'd done this, pushed away the one person who'd shown them kindness, because his pride couldn't bear the weight of his own failure. I'm sorry, he said, but the words felt too small. Helena paused, her hand on the door. So am I, she said softly. She didn't leave, but she didn't turn around either, just stood there, silent, while the morning light grew stronger and Agnes slept between them. Thomas sank into his chair and put his head in his hands. The shame felt like drowning. Thomas sat outside on the porch step, letting the rain soak through his clothes. The storm had returned with the morning, clouds rolling in dark and heavy. He welcomed the cold, It was less than he deserved. Inside, Helena still tended to Agnes. He'd heard her moving around, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, doing what needed doing. Even though he'd tried to drive her away, he was a fool. Worse than a fool. Sarah would have been ashamed of him. She'd always said pride was the one luxury poor people couldn't afford. That accepting help with grace was its own kind of strength. But Thomas had forgotten that. Had let his shame eat away at everything good until all that remained was this bitter, useless pride. He heard something through the rain, a sound that didn't belong. Crying. Not Agnes. The sound came from inside, but it wasn't his daughter's voice. Thomas stood slowly, moved to the door, through the gap. He could see Helena bent over Agnes's bed. Her shoulders shook. Tears ran down her face. "I'm sorry." Helena whispered to Agnes's sleeping form. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I couldn't save my own daughter, but I can save you. I have to save you." The raw pain in her voice made Thomas's chest tighten. "I was too proud," Helena continued, her words breaking. "Too proud to admit I needed help. Too proud to ask someone more experienced. And Emma died because of it. Because I thought I knew better. Because I couldn't bear to look weak." She pressed her hands to her face, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. "I lost her." Helena said, "I lost my baby girl because I was too stubborn and proud to save her. And I swore I'd never let that happen again. Never let pride keep me from helping a child. From doing whatever needed doing. Even if people looked down on me for it." Thomas's eyes burned. He understood now. Truly understood. Helena wasn't here out of pity. She was here fighting her own demons. Trying to redeem a failure that would haunt her forever. Just like him. He pushed the door open. Helena looked up, startled. Tears still streaming down her face. "I couldn't save Sarah," Thomas said. His voice cracked. "I've been so afraid I'd fail Agnes the same way. That I'd lose her because I'm not enough. Because I can't provide what she needs." Helena stood slowly, wiping at her eyes. "I pushed you away because accepting your help meant admitting I'd failed," Thomas continued. "Meant facing the truth that I can't do this alone. And that terrified me more than watching her die." The confession broke something open in him. Thomas felt tears on his own face now. "But I see it now," he said. "I see what you've been trying to tell me. Pride kills. Pride is what took Emma from you. And it's what almost took Agnes from me." Helena's breath hitched. "Thomas, we're the same," he said. "Both of us so wrapped up in our own failures that we can't see what's right in front of us." He moved to Agnes's bedside, took his daughter's small hand. "I need your help. Not because I can pay you. Not because I deserve it, but because Agnes needs it. And I'm not too proud anymore to say I can't do this alone." Helena came to stand beside him. Their shoulders almost touched. "I need this too," she said quietly. "Need to help her. Need to prove to myself that I can save a child. That Emma's death wasn't in vain. That I learned something from it." Thomas looked at her tear-stained face. "Then help me save her. Please. Whatever it takes." Helena nodded. "Together," she said. "Together." Thomas agreed. They turned to Agnes. Helena checked her pulse, her breathing. Then she opened her medical bag again. "She needs one more treatment," Helena said, "to make sure the fever doesn't return." "Tell me what to do," Thomas said. They worked side by side, Helena guiding, Thomas following. Mixing medicine, preparing compresses, monitoring vitals. Two broken people working together toward one goal, saving the child who'd become. In some strange way. Important to both of them. Outside. The rain began to ease. The storm was passing. Thomas and Helena knelt beside the bed, both their hands touching Agnes's small sleeping form. Neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. And then, as the first true light of morning touched the eastern horizon, Agnes's fever broke completely. Her skin cooled. Her breathing deepened into real sleep, peaceful and steady. Helena checked her pulse one last time. "She's going to live," she whispered. Thomas felt tears streaming freely now. He didn't try to stop them. Helena's hand found his, their fingers laced together without conscious decision. "Thank you," Thomas said. "No," Helena replied softly. "Thank you." They stayed like that, kneeling together, hands clasped, watching Agnes sleep. Outside, the storm passed into memory. Inside, two wounded souls found something they'd both thought lost forever: hope. Full morning arrived with clear skies and clean light. Agnes woke slowly, her eyes focusing properly for the first time in days. She looked up at Thomas and smiled weakly. "Papa," she whispered, "I'm thirsty." Thomas laughed, the sound half sob. "I'll get you water, sweetheart." He brought her a cup. Agnes drank in small sips, her hands steadier than they'd been in days. Helena checked her pulse, her breathing, her temperature. Everything stable, everything normal. "You're going to be fine," Helena told Agnes gently. "You were very sick, but you're going to be just fine now." Agnes looked at Helena with curious eyes. "You're pretty. Are you a friend of Papa's?" Helena glanced at Thomas, something soft in her expression. "Yes," she said, "I suppose I am." Thomas busied himself making coffee. His hands shook slightly as he measured grounds, poured water. The exhaustion of the long night was catching up with him. But underneath it, he felt lighter than he had in years. Agnes drifted back to sleep, peaceful now instead of fevered. Helena stood, stretched, winced at stiff muscles. "Sit," Thomas said, gesturing to the table. "Please." Helena hesitated, then sat. Thomas poured coffee into 2 chipped cups and joined her. They sat in silence for a moment, both too tired for words. But it was a comfortable silence now, the sharp edges worn smooth. "Why?" Thomas asked finally. "Why would you really help us?" Helena wrapped her hands around her cup, staring into the dark liquid. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "When Emma died, I thought my life was over," she said. "I'd failed at the one thing that mattered most, being a mother, keeping my child safe." She paused. "Charles and we fell apart after that. He blamed me. I blamed myself. When he died a year later, I felt nothing, just emptiness." Thomas listened, not interrupting. "I started traveling," Helena continued. "Thought maybe if I kept moving, I could outrun the grief, the guilt. But everywhere I went, I saw children, and every child reminded me of Emma, of what I'd lost, of how I'd failed." She looked up at him then, her gray eyes clear and honest. "Then I heard about you in town, a desperate father begging for help, a sick daughter, a child dying because of money, not medicine." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't walk away. I couldn't let another child die because someone was too proud or too selfish to help." "You weren't trying to save Agnes," Thomas said slowly. "You were trying to save yourself." "Maybe," Helena admitted. "Or maybe I was trying to prove that Emma's death taught me something. That I could be better. That pride doesn't have to win." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "But somewhere in the night, it stopped being about redemption. It became about you. About Agnes. About 2 people who deserved help, regardless of whether they could pay for it." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "You did save her. You saved us both." Helena's eyes glistened. "And in saving you, maybe I saved myself too." They sat there, hands clasped across the scarred wooden table. Outside, birds began to sing the first sounds of normal life returning after the storm. "What will you do now?" Thomas asked. "Keep traveling." Helena was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she said finally. I've been running for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to stay still. Agnes stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that might have been a laugh. She's dreaming, Helena said softly. That's good. It means she's really healing. Thomas looked at this woman who'd appeared in his doorway like an answer to desperate prayer. She'd given them everything and asked for nothing, had faced her own demons to save his daughter. Stay, he said. Helena's eyes widened. What? Stay for a few days. Thomas clarified. Help Agnes recover her strength. Let yourself rest. He hesitated. I know I can't offer you much. But I make better stew than porridge, and Agnes would love to hear about Boston. Helena stared at him. For a moment, Thomas thought she'd refuse. Thought his offer was too small, too presumptuous. Then she smiled. It transformed her whole face, made her look younger, less haunted. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like that very much. Thomas smiled back. Then it's settled. Agnes called out in her sleep, not distressed but happy. Both adults turned to look at her. She's going to be all right. Helena said, really all right. Thanks to you. Thomas replied, thanks to both of us. Helena corrected, some battles can't be fought alone. Thomas nodded. He understood that now. Understood that accepting help wasn't weakness. That asking for it wasn't failure. That sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was open the door when someone knocked. The morning light filled the cabin, warm and gentle. Two people sat at a scarred table, drinking bitter coffee and finding something neither had expected. Purpose, connection, hope, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the future held more than grief and loneliness. 3 days later, Thomas woke to the smell of bacon frying. For a moment he was disoriented. Then he remembered. Helena was still here, had stayed, as promised, to help Agnes recover. He dressed quickly and came into the main room. Helena stood at the stove, cooking breakfast. Agnes sat at the table, bundled in blankets, watching Helena with bright, curious eyes. Papa, Thomas smiled. Is she now? There are buildings so tall they touch the clouds, Agnes said, her voice filled with wonder. And shops with windows full of beautiful things, and ladies in fancy dresses walking everywhere. Helena glanced at Thomas, her expression amused. I may have exaggerated slightly. Tell the truth now, Thomas said, joining them at the table. Were you one of those fancy ladies? Sometimes, Helena admitted, when I had to be. But I always preferred my husband's study. All those medical books. She flipped the bacon expertly. Charles thought I was just keeping his library organized. He never knew I was reading everything. Agnes leaned forward. Were you a secret doctor? Something like that, Helena said. She served breakfast bacon, eggs, bread toasted on the stove, simple food. But it felt like a feast. They ate together, conversation flowing easily. Agnes told Helena about the wildflowers she wanted to pick when she was strong enough. Helena described the harbor in Boston, the ships coming and going. Thomas mostly listened. Watching the two of them together, something had shifted over the past 3 days. The cabin felt different, warmer, more alive, as if Helena's presence had breathed life back into spaces that had been dead since Sarah left. After breakfast, Helena checked Agnes's vitals one last time. Strong and steady, she pronounced. You're completely recovered, young lady. Agnes beamed. Can I go outside? Tomorrow, Helena said firmly. 1 more day of rest. Doctor's orders. Agnes pouted but didn't argue. She settled back into her blankets with a book Helena had given her a collection of children's stories from. Boston. Thomas walked Helena outside to check on her horse. The animal had been stabled in his small barn, well fed and comfortable. She's ready to travel when you are. Thomas said. Helena stroked the horse's nose thoughtfully. About that, she said. I've been thinking. Thomas waited. There's a town about 2 days' ride west. Helena said, Greenvale. They lost their doctor last year. I heard they're desperate for anyone with medical training. You're thinking of settling? Thomas asked. Maybe. Helena said, I'm tired of running, and I think maybe I've found something here worth staying for. She looked at him directly. I'd be close enough to visit. If you'd want visitors. Thomas's heart lifted. We'd like that. Both of us. Helena smiled. Good, because Agnes made me promise to come see her wildflowers this spring. They stood together in the barn, the morning sun slanting through the gaps in the wood. Helena's hand found his not romantic. Exactly, but comfortable. Connected. Thank you, Thomas said. For everything. Thank you, Helena replied. For letting me help. For reminding me that some things are worth fighting for. They walked back to the cabin together. Agnes saw them coming and waved from the window, her face bright with health and happiness. Thomas paused at the door, looking at his daughter, then at Helena beside him, then at the open door leading into warmth and light. He thought about prayers and answers, about strangers who became family, about doors that opened in storms and let in exactly what was needed. Come on, Helena said gently. Your daughter wants to hear about the ships in the harbor. Thomas followed her inside. The door stood open behind them, letting in morning light and the promise of spring coming. Inside, Agnes laughed at something Helena said. The sound filled the cabin like bells, like music, like hope made audible. Thomas Brennan stood in his doorway and watched a doctor teach his daughter about distant cities. He thought about how prayers got answered not with miracles exactly, but with people, with those brave enough to knock on doors in the dark, with those willing to open those doors and let strangers become something more. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but no longer empty. Helena would go to Greenvale, but she'd come back, and when she did, they'd share meals and stories and the quiet comfort of people who understood each other's wounds. Maybe one day it would become something more. Maybe not. For now, it was enough to stand in the light and watch his daughter smile. To know they weren't alone anymore. To understand that sometimes the greatest strength was simply opening the door. Thomas closed it gently, shutting out the cold inside. Warmth and voices and the sound of laughter. Inside, home.